There's a very memorable scene in Roger Rabbit where the title character almost randomly breaks out of his handcuffs. When asked why he didn't do it sooner, he says that he couldn't do it before because it wasn't funny before. Now, Roger Rabbit is a great movie, but that one joke doesn't seem to have aged very well. Since 1989, cartoons have become a lot more story-driven, a lot more in-depth, and generally less gag-based. People wonder why I take things that aren't meant to be taken seriously so seriously in cartoons, like, say, Town and Out. Here's the thing. They essentially assume the jokes are funny when I don't find them funny, and when they do that, and the jokes aren't funny, I have to find whatever I see seriously. Most people do. Can you get away with breaking logic or continuity if a joke is funny? Yes. Can you get away with having an asshole in your show who is nothing but a sadist, as long as he's funny? Yes. Should you ever do it, especially if you're just getting started writing? Hell fucking no. Let's start with the very obvious. If the joke you assumed was funny broke continuity, placed a character out of character, or could destroy the story, wasn't funny, then everything falls apart. It sounds like common sense, but I can see why some people need to assume that certain jokes are funny. Even on high-made television shows, not just webtoons, that aren't South Park, episodes for cartoons take a very long time to make. You'll be seeing and hearing the jokes over and over again, and there will be some points where you'll think that it's as stale as a 3-week-old potato chip that's been lying out there in the sun on the windowsill. At some point, you're going to have to assume that what you did is good enough, although to most writers, nothing is ever good enough. Sometimes a writer's joke won't work because the animator or voice actor didn't do their job well enough. In essence, when you assume that something is funny, you are playing with fire, and sooner or later, you're going to get burned. It's inevitable. At least 90% of the animated atrocities I do are because the creators assume that something was funny when it clearly wasn't. Patrick's line in the card about how you couldn't expect his usual brand of stupidity was assumed to be funny. Tommy's Big Job assumed that all of the gore would be funny. Ren Seeks Help assumed that all of the animal abuse and cruelty would be funny. All of the examples aren't this extreme, but they can be. Also, keep in mind that different people have different senses of humor. One of the most divisive episodes in history is Homer's Enemy from The Simpsons, because it's established on this fact. It assumes that its cruelty to Frank Grimes is funny. To some people, it is, and that's one of their favorite episodes. To other people who don't find the cruelty funny, it's where the show started to go bad. So what's the answer to this problem? You can't exactly play it safe with humor, reusing jokes that have been done 1,000 times as is, because that'll make what you're doing cliché. What I like to do is get a strong foundation, usually in the form of a good story. A story is something to fall back on if your humor fails. And it's easier to make sure that you have no plot holes than making sure each of your jokes work. You can actually do that on your own. And that brings me to my next point. One that can help you mitigate the assumption part of all of this. Ask other people to look over what you're doing. Ask multiple people from various backgrounds. There are two people you definitely want to ask besides your showrunner and the network if something you're doing is funny. Someone in your profession and someone in your target audience. Each are equally important. Open your ears to the criticism and never respond with, "but it's funny," to deflect their criticism. You don't have to take each of their criticisms, but keep it in mind and examine it. If you keep getting this criticism, it's probably something you have to change. Professionals should understand the mechanics of what you're trying to do, and they should understand the structure of jokes very well. On the other hand, there's the target audience. Did you know that Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone wouldn't have been published if the publisher's daughter didn't read it and enjoy it? 8 publishers turned J.K. Rowling down before, and that became one of the biggest success stories in literature, period. It's a good idea to get someone in your target audience to actually like your product. Oh, and this is very important. Make sure that either of these groups are not in your immediate family. You will get biased information. And this obviously doesn't work with shows that have been going on for a very long time, because people will inevitably love everything it does, no matter how heinous, or they'll hate it and everything it does without provocation. This is more for when you're just starting out on, like, indie projects or something. Even at the end of this, there's still a chance the jokes won't be funny. If you got a good foundation, like a really good story or a really interesting concept, that's great. Otherwise, we're going to have to minimize the damage that you can do. Sometimes a joke failing is like a dud firework, and sometimes a joke failing is like a firework exploding on the audience. If anything, we'd rather have the former. In the grand scheme of things, something dull as shit is better than something that becomes actively repulsive. So here's a few general tips. Stay far far away from morals. If you're assuming this parody of a moral is funny, and it isn't, what you've done is created an episode that treats a heinous moral seriously. There are episodes like Stuck in the Ringer or Seahorse Seashell Party, Story of Brenda Q, or Dexter vs. Santa Claus. It's generally a good idea to keep morals away from jokes to begin with. They have a bad habit of undermining what you're trying to teach. The MLP episodes The Cutie Box and Inspiration Manifestation would have been better episodes if their morals weren't immediately followed by a joke. Even though you're staying away from morals, do have a sense of morality throughout the episode. The characters that you've shown us as protagonists should be the ones doing the good things, and the antagonists should be the ones doing the bad things. What the good guys do to the bad guys is a tough one. The safest option is to have the good guys succeed in spite of the bad guys' efforts, but the most common ones is having the good guys beat the bad guys. One course meal fails because a good guy is doing an evil action, among other reasons. Never have one character beat up on another because you think that it's funny. Which brings me to my next point. Keep characters in character. There's definitely some breathing room here, and having characters act completely out of character is usually a good setup for a joke. If you do decide to do this, keep it minimal. Each time you make another out-of-character joke, you are pushing your luck further and further. If you do have an out-of-character joke, give it some purpose. Patrick cleaning out his rock is out of character and I'm what's stupid, but it has some purpose. Patrick being aware of his stupidity in the card is out of character, but it does not have purpose. You can use jokes or chants to get your characters into a bad situation, but using jokes or chants to get them out of it risks being insulting and stupid. Many animated atrocities fall apart only at the ending, because the joke that they spent the whole episode building up to was stupid beyond all belief. An example, failure is not a factory installed option from American Dad. The whole episode is about Stan having a crisis due to not outsmarting a used car salesman that causes him to lose his job and bring his family into poverty. It ends with this being Stan's plan to guilt trip the used car salesman and save some money. Never assume that the joke you built up to the whole episode and ended on is funny. In fact, assume that it's terrible. Assume that it's the worst joke you've ever made. I can make a top 20 list on episodes that are just ruined by a heinous ending. I haven't reviewed many of these on their own because it's very hard to review an episode where the ending is what kills it irreparably and everything else is just fine. I believe the closest in that category is Love Bugs. The ending joke where the candied hearts were bugs was assumed to be funny, and funny enough to destroy the logic that the rest of the episode is built on. Keep a karma character on all of your characters. Make sure each of your characters gets their just desserts or rewards. This is the easiest way to avoid a torture porn. This should go without saying. Now keep in mind, these are all just guidelines, and better when you're just getting started. At some point, you are going to have to take a risk, but just know that there is going to be some times where you're not going to get the payoff you want. You need to minimize damage as much as possible if you're going for these risks. Before you jump off the bridge, make sure your bungee cord is secured. Is it possible to succeed by breaking any or every one of these rules? Or in spite of them? Of course. But there are many, many more adult party cartoons or Mr. Pickles in the world than there are Rick and Morty's. When you're just starting out, it's not the time to be experimental. Before you can learn how to break the rules, like the classic Looney Tunes often did, you need to learn how to follow them. Many novices assume that they can break a rule simply because what they think they're doing is funny. Many experts think that that's the case. But if you've seen almost anything that I've been reviewing, you can easily see that that's not a smart option. When I review a bad SpongeBob or Family Guy episode, I don't say that's not funny, because it gets into the kind of no duh kind of territory. Town and Out isn't funny, no duh. Bubsy isn't funny, no duh. Seahorse Seashell Party isn't funny, no duh. A Pal for Gary isn't funny, no duh. They assume that SpongeBob yelling at Gary while Gary was being eaten by the monster was funny. No duh, it's not funny. So if you're going to assume that something is funny, make sure that it won't do too much damage, and that the episode has something else to fall back on. Trust me, it will save you so much trouble in the future.